I remember the specific silence of my childhood bedroom in 1985, illuminated only by a flashlight under a heavy quilt. While the neighborhood kids played noisy games of capture the flag outside, I was building a fortress out of encyclopedias. There was a distinct safety in that analog quiet, a feeling that the world could only reach me if I let it. Then came the teenage years, and with them, the constant, well-meaning pressure from adults to just get out more. I spent high school lunch breaks hiding in the library stacks, convinced that my desire for silence was a diagnosable defect. We were told that popularity was the currency of survival, and looking at my empty calendar felt like looking at a bankrupted account. I carried that insecurity into my 20s, forcing myself into loud networking mixers and chaotic dinner parties to prove I was normal. I stood in crowded rooms holding a lukewarm drink, surrounded by laughter, yet feeling a profound, aching hollowness in my chest. It was the specific loneliness of being physically surrounded by people, but remaining completely invisible to every single one of them. Then the technology changed, and suddenly that landline on the wall transformed into a buzzing demand in my pocket, 24/7. You know that sinking feeling when your phone lights up with another group invitation and your stomach just drops? Instead of excitement, you feel drained, fantasizing about reorganizing your bookshelf rather than making small talk over brunch. For decades, I thought this reaction meant I was broken, until I stumbled upon research from the University of Chicago. They made a distinction that changed my life: the massive psychological gap between the state of loneliness and the choice of solitude. Loneliness is the distress signal your brain sends when your social needs are starving and you feel unsafe. Chosen solitude is something else entirely. It is the deliberate act of stepping back to reclaim your own energy. You can live in a cabin alone and feel full, or stand in a stadium and feel like you are dying. The difference isn't the number of bodies in the room, but whether the connections you have actually feed your soul. Think about that friend who has known you since college versus the influencer with thousands of followers who feels empty. The UCLA loneliness scale proved that people with huge networks often report the highest levels of isolation and despair. We are actually measuring the rare, distinct quality of feeling deeply seen, understood, and valued by another human being. And here is the part nobody talks about: the counterintuitive truth that flips the entire script on social isolation. People who prefer a smaller circle of friends are not running away from connection or hiding from the world. They are simply chasing something more substantial, refusing to snack on shallow interactions when they need a real meal. If you look at the personality research, these individuals often possess a quiet, sturdy kind of self-awareness. It is called intrinsic motivation, the ability to do things because they matter to you, not to the audience. They paint, they build, they write, and they think without constantly checking to see if anyone is clapping. These people aren't flawed. They just have an inner life so rich that public approval isn't a priority. I wasted my 20s trying to fix myself, wondering why I couldn't just be that rock star networker. I wanted to be the person who thrived in the noise, who could talk over 3 other people at dinner. But science suggests that those who are fine with solitude possess a skill that is becoming dangerously extinct. They can simply sit there with their own thoughts, in a room with no noise and no distractions. There is no panic, no desperate scramble for a smartphone, no need for another person to fill the silence. Psychologists call this emotional self-regulation, the ability to handle your own internal weather without an umbrella. It is the capacity to process your own feelings without constantly handing that heavy job off to someone else. Now, before you roll your eyes and assume this self-reliance leads to a cold, lonely existence, wait. Studies on isolation found that people comfortable with being alone often end up with the most legitimate relationships. Because when they finally do reach out to a friend, they are doing it from a place of strength. They connect because they want to share who they are, not because they have a void to fill. They pour their limited social energy into people who actually get them, respecting boundaries and rejecting performance. Quality over quantity isn't just a bumper sticker. It is a survival strategy for your mental health, especially in a world that is constantly screaming at you to be on, accessible, and performing 24/7. I found something striking in the academic literature on aging involving over 30,000 participants. Researchers found people who were technically isolated, yet reported 0 feelings of loneliness or distress. These individuals were often functioning better than the social butterflies who felt secretly disconnected. This tells us that the human need for connection is deeply personal, variable, and distinct. Having only a handful of close relationships isn't a social deficit, it is a legitimate personality orientation. And then there is the creativity piece, the part where the data gets truly compelling. Einstein famously said that the monotony and solitude of a quiet life actually stimulates the creative mind. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Constant social processing burns through your brain's limited cognitive fuel. When you aren't reading faces or managing group dynamics, your brain enters divergent thinking mode. It is a mental state where you can explore multiple solutions without the crushing pressure of groupthink. People with few friends aren't missing out on inspiration. They are aggressively creating the space for it. But we have to be honest about the shadow side, because this isn't a fairy tale. Having few friends doesn't mean you are lonely, but it also doesn't mean you are immune. The National Institute on Aging warns about chronic perceived isolation, a very specific type of pain. It is that feeling of being alone in the world, regardless of how many people are physically present. This specific feeling affects your attention, your cognition, and even your long-term cardiovascular health. So the question isn't, how many friends do you have? But do you feel connected? Does your current social setup actually align with what you need, or is it just a performance? People who thrive with fewer friendships share a trait called self-concept clarity, a strong internal compass. They know exactly who they are without needing a constant chorus of external voices to confirm it. They have learned that solitude is not emptiness. It is simply space for the mind to breathe. It is the necessary room to think, to create, and to process the overwhelming noise of the modern world. This doesn't mean they never feel lonely. It means they know the difference between being alone and being abandoned. They distinguish between the temporary quiet of a Saturday night and the chronic pain of being unseen. If you have always felt out of step with the cultural mandate to have a packed social calendar, listen, you are not deficient in social skills. You are likely just emotionally selective and highly observant. We assume everyone needs the same social diet, but that is as biologically false as saying everyone likes the same food. Some people genuinely need a banquet of daily interactions to feel alive and energized. Others need just one or two deep connections and long stretches of silence to recharge their batteries. Neither approach is healthier. They are just different psychological profiles shaped by our unique neurobiology. The person with two close friends and a rich internal life is not failing at the game of life. And the person with 50 acquaintances and no one to call at 2 a.m. is certainly not winning. We are all just trying to find the specific configuration of connection that lets us be fully ourselves. Sometimes that means choosing the quiet path, even when the world keeps telling you to join the crowd. I eventually stopped apologizing for the nights I chose, books over bars, and I have never been happier. If this quiet description resonates with you, please know that your place on the spectrum is valid. We are building a community for those who prefer the deep end of the pool, and I'd love for you to join us. Honor your own nature, respect your need for silence, and never mistake your solitude for a deficit.